Have you ever stood in front of a mirror, adjusted your tie, and quietly wondered, when did my own family stop seeing me? My name is Alex Monroe. I'm 38 years old. By day, I work in classified government operations, managing cyber defense systems that protect millions. I've been awarded for projects no one is allowed to speak about. I lead teams that operate in the shadows, solving problems before the public even knows they exist. But to my family, I'm just the dropout, the one who left my tea, the one who said no to the family tech empire, the one who, according to them, threw it all away. Tonight I'm attending a gala thrown in honor of my younger brother's promotion. The venue is grand. The guest list is elite. But me, I was seated near the back. No welcome, no respect, just polite nods from people who think they already know who I am. They don't, and what they're about to discover will change everything. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay with me. Because what happens next, they never saw coming. The city skyline shimmered like polished chrome as my cab pulled up to the Echelon Pavilion, an architectural marvel perched atop a downtown tower, glowing with the wealth of old tech money and new ambition. Tonight's event was a celebration of my younger brother, Daniel Monroe, being named the new CEO of Monroe Intelligence Systems, a family-founded AI company that had just landed a massive private equity deal. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with designer perfumes, echoing laughter, and the clink of crystal against polished silver. Everyone looked radiant, important, invincible. I walked in alone, wearing a plain dark suit. The young woman at the reception desk smiled, politely glanced at my invite, and hesitated. Her eyes scanned the list again before she said, "You're at table 19, sir, that way." I nodded and followed her gesture. Table 19 wasn't near the stage. It wasn't near the family. It was near the service entrance, tucked in the shadows like a coat rack they forgot to hide. As I weaved through the room, I heard whispers, "Is that him, the brother?" Soft, sharp, followed by glances that quickly turned away. At my table were two venture capital interns, a marketing consultant from out of town, and a woman who said she worked in trend forecasting, whatever that meant. They nodded vaguely as I sat. One of them asked, "So you work in tech?" I smiled faintly. You could say that. They turned back to their phones. Across the ballroom, under a crown of golden light, stood my father, Richard Monroe, a towering man in a steel-gray tuxedo, champagne in hand, speaking with a group of senators and hedge fund managers as if the world answered to him. And beside him, Daniel, polished, charismatic, born with that easy confidence I never had. In a tux, tailored like it was molded to his bones. He laughed at something, then leaned down to kiss the cheek of a tall brunette in a red satin gown, his wife Celine. It looked like a family empire in perfect symmetry, and I was the pixel out of place. The music dimmed for a toast. Richard took the stage and spoke of legacy, of vision, of Daniel's tenacity, discipline, and boldness. The crowd applauded. Celine smiled like she had married into royalty. I clapped too. I wasn't angry, not really. But inside, I felt the same quiet weight I always carried when I visited home, the sense that no matter what I achieved out there, I would always be the one who left. Flashbacks slipped into my mind like ghosts. My father's voice, stern and cold, the day I told him I wouldn't be joining the company. "You're throwing away your future," he said. "For what government work principle?" My brother shrugged. "Let him go," he said. "He'll be back when the money runs out." But the money never did. What I found was purpose, the kind you don't measure in IPOs. I took a sip of water, trying to swallow the lump forming in my throat. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walk through the entrance in full military dress blues. He scanned the room, once then began walking toward my table. I recognized the stride, precise, respectful, intentional, Colonel Jacob Miller. And just like that, the air changed. And that's when I knew tonight wouldn't end the way they expected. Colonel Jacob Miller walked toward me with a quiet authority that turned heads before he even reached our table. The conversation at table 19 fizzled into awkward silence. A few guests nearby paused mid-sentence eyebrows, raised eyes tracking his every step like they were trying to place his face or figure out who he was approaching. And then it happened. He stopped in front of me, squared his shoulders, and offered a crisp salute. "Director Monroe," he said loud enough for 3 tables to hear, "it's an honor, sir." I stood returning the gesture with a firm handshake. "Good to see you, Colonel," I replied, my tone even composed. "Enjoying civilian air for a change," Jacob chuckled. Always strange not to be behind a blast door. A ripple passed through the room. I saw it in the shift of postures, the whispers darting across faces like sparks. One of the venture interns at my table nearly dropped his wine glass. The woman from Trend Forecasting leaned forward. "Did he just call you director?" Before I could answer, a familiar voice rang out across the room. "What's going on over there?" It was my father now making his way through the crowd. Behind him, Daniel followed curiosity, masked beneath a polite smile. Richard reached our table just as Colonel Miller nodded respectfully and stepped away. My father looked at me then after the colonel. "Who was that?" he asked, brow furrowing. "Colonel Jacob Miller," I said. "We worked together." In what he scoffed. "You fix computers for some office in D.C., right? Don't tell me they're saluting interns these days." I stayed silent, letting his words hang. The people at our table were no longer pretending not to listen. Daniel stepped in, his voice light. "Dad, leave it. Maybe Alex pulled some strings to impress a friend." He chuckled softly. Let him have his moment. There it was again, that quiet condescension. The same tone he used when I walked out of our father's office years ago, refusing the role of Strategic Product Director at Monroe Intelligence Systems. I remembered the silence after I said no, the disbelief, the disappointment, the outright rage. My father had stared at me like I'd betrayed him. "You want to walk away from this legacy for what government bureaucracy?" And Daniel, standing behind his desk, had shrugged. "Hey, if you're going to waste your potential, at least don't drag the family name down with you." That day, I walked out and never returned. Until now. From across the ballroom, I heard murmurs, people pulling out their phones, tapping my name into search bars. And then, like a fuse catching, I saw one of them freeze, eyes wide, jaw slack. He turned to his friend, whispered something, and pointed subtly toward me. In that moment, my father followed the gesture. He looked down at the phone the man was holding, reading something. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. And just like that, the myth of the dropout began to fracture. But the biggest disruption wasn't online. It was already in motion, heading straight for the Gala doors just 15 minutes away. The ballroom buzzed with subtle electricity. The colonel's salute had left a dent in the evening's polished facade, but no one knew just how deep the crack would run. Laughter returned, but it sounded thinner now. Every few minutes someone glanced in my direction, some curious, others cautious. My father retreated to the VIP circle, his smile carefully reassembled. Daniel disappeared backstage with the event coordinator, likely trying to steady the optics. Then it happened. A new presence entered the room quietly, but with undeniable weight. 2 sharply dressed security agents moved ahead, parting the crowd like a tide. Behind them walked a woman in a midnight blue suit with a silver pin on her lapel and the calm, composed face of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to own a room. Secretary Evelyn Rhodes, Undersecretary of Defense for Advanced Systems. The crowd hushed. Conversations fizzled mid-sentence. People turned, craning their necks, unsure why one of the Pentagon's most powerful figures would attend a private tech gala. And then she walked straight past the Monroe family, past the press, past the senators, past the donors. She stopped in front of me. "Director Monroe," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I wasn't expecting you here tonight. Always a surprise to see you out of the command center." I stood and shook her hand. "Even I get a night off once a year," I replied, meeting her gaze. Her grip was firm, her smile genuine, her eyes scanned the guests around us. "Well," she added, with a hint of mischief, "I'm glad the person overseeing our country's most sensitive AI project gets to enjoy a little music and wine." Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Phones were back out, screens lit up. The realization hit like a cold draft creeping under a ballroom door. They knew who I was now. Someone muttered from behind me. "Did she say AI project?" Another voice added. "That's the guy from the cyber division, Project Prometheus. I read a leak about it last year." I caught Daniel returning to the main floor, eyes darting nervously as he took in the scene. My father stood rigid beside a foreign dignitary, his expression locked in that uncanny stillness, part disbelief, part damage control. Secretary Rhodes leaned in slightly. "I'll be seeing you next week at the interagency review, but if you have a few minutes tonight, I'd love your opinion on the Prometheus deployment timeline. We're fast-tracking it, and I trust your instincts more than anyone's." "Of course," I said calmly. "I've got some updated specs I can share." As she moved away, taking a glass of wine from a waiter and chatting with a senator, I could feel the entire event pivot like a stage on a turntable. All eyes had shifted. Not to Daniel, to me, because what no one at the gala had realized until now was simple. I wasn't just attending as the outcast brother. I was the director of strategic cyber intelligence for the Department of Defense. And Monroe? Intelligence Systems, the family company they built without me, was about to pitch for a contract on a project I led, the same project they mocked me for pursuing. And now I was the one who held their future in my hands. The morning light crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my father's estate like an uninvited guest. Everything in the house was pristine, calculated white marble floors, perfectly trimmed orchids on the table, and the quiet hum of a world that never acknowledged discomfort. I sat at the breakfast table in a crisp button-down, the scent of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air untouched. Across from me, my father read the financial section of the Times, his silver reading glasses balanced at the tip of his nose. He didn't speak for a while, just the occasional rustle of a page turning. My mother set down a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. "Still like them soft?" she asked gently, trying to bridge a decade of silence with a single question. I gave her a small nod. "Thank you, Mom." My father didn't look up, so he said finally, his voice as casual as someone asking about the weather still playing war games. The eggs went cold before I answered. I glanced up, still pretending to be ethical. He blinked just once, but the newspaper slowly folded. "Don't take last night personally," he said. "No one expected that kind of spectacle." I almost laughed. A Pentagon official acknowledging my work is a spectacle now. He sighed. "You embarrassed your brother. He worked hard for that night." "No," I said. "He was embarrassed because he saw what I've become and realized it's bigger than he ever thought." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You always had a flair for drama. You could have worked with us, built something real, but you chose. What secrets classified projects? That's not a legacy, Alex. That's exile." I stared at him. "Do you even know what Prometheus is?" "Some defense contract," he muttered. "It's the AI backbone for national infrastructure defense. It guards our hospitals, our grids, our satellites. If it fails, people die. Real people. You think what you do is legacy? I think it's revenue. What I do is responsibility." Silence. My mother stood nearby, wringing her hands, saying nothing. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thin leather ID wallet, flipped it open, set it on the table between the toast and the newspaper. The golden badge and seal of the Department of Defense gleamed in the morning sun. Beneath it, my title, Director of Strategic Cyber Intelligence, Level 9 clearance. My father didn't touch it. He just looked at it the way he used to look at spreadsheets that didn't add up. I stood slowly. "Next time you speak to the board about Project Prometheus, remember this conversation, and remember who signs off. He didn't respond. My mother's eyes glistened, but she still didn't speak. It wasn't until I reached the threshold of the dining room that I heard her voice soft, almost inaudible. "I kept your letters," she said. "Everyone. I didn't know what to say." I paused, turned slightly, and nodded. "You don't have to say anything," but I wanted her to. The clink of silverware resumed as I walked away, because the real confrontation wouldn't happen over cold eggs. It was waiting for us 3 days later, 30 stories up inside a boardroom made of glass and pride. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped into the top floor of Monroe Intelligence Systems, sleek, sterile, and dripping with power. The lobby outside the executive boardroom gleamed like a museum with curated digital displays of product milestones awards and photos of my father and Daniel shaking hands with world leaders. Not a single trace of me. But I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to be heard. A young assistant approached nervously. "Director Monroe, this way, please. They're expecting a Department of Defense representative. They just don't know it's you." I nodded, once walked past the glass walls, and entered the boardroom. 20 people in suits turned as I stepped in, executives, engineers, outside consultants. My father sat at the head of the long ebony table, hands folded. Daniel was beside him, flipping through a glossy briefing packet, confident and calm until he saw me. His eyes widened, then narrowed. He leaned toward my father. What is he doing here? Before either could say a word, the chairman of the board, Victor Langford, stood, a man I'd worked with on a NATO cybersecurity initiative years ago. He smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our Department of Defense representative, Director Alex Monroe." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. My father's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Daniel looked frozen, gripping his pen so tightly I thought it might snap. I sat calmly at the far end of the table, opened my folder, and began. As of this week, Monroe Intelligence Systems is a top contender for the Prometheus Phase 2 cybersecurity contract. But before any contract can be awarded, we need clarity on 2 fronts: cost structure and compliance integrity. I watched Daniel flinch at the word integrity. Flipping through the documents, I pointed to a specific line item. "There's a $47 million expense listed under Foreign R&D Operations in your Singapore division. Can someone walk me through what that funding supported?" Daniel shifted in his chair. "It's auxiliary development for adaptive neural mesh modeling." I nodded. "Do you have documentation proving that any of that research is tied to Prometheus-specific security needs?" He blinked. "It's in development." I slid a document across the table. "According to internal analysis and cross-agency audits, your Singapore team hasn't submitted a single security report in over 2 years. And based on our algorithms, 31% of the code you submitted overlaps with proprietary systems developed under a separate DoD program." The room tensed. Executives glanced at one another. One consultant slowly closed his laptop. My father finally spoke. "That code was developed independently. We've invested millions." With respect, I interrupted. "The Pentagon doesn't care about sunk costs. It cares about unauthorized integration." I leaned forward, looking Daniel in the eye, not as a brother, but as the director holding his fate in his hands. "I can escalate this to legal today, or you can cooperate fully and transparently with a joint audit. Either way, the contract is frozen until further notice." Daniel looked pale. My father stared down at the table, silent for the first time in years. "I'm not here for revenge," I said quietly. "I'm here because national security is not a family business. It's a responsibility. And in that moment, I wasn't the dropout. I was the decision maker. And they knew it." The apartment was quiet that evening, just the low hum of the fridge and the distant city noise bleeding through the windows. My uniform hung neatly by the door, the creases still sharp from the day's confrontation. I sat at my desk back in my civilian clothes, staring at the open file labeled Prometheus Phase 2, Audit Trail. I had done what needed to be done. No raised voice, no ego, just facts, just integrity. But the hollow ache in my chest didn't fade with the silence. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old envelope yellowed at the edges, creased but never opened. It was the resignation letter I had written the day I left MIT, the day they expelled my ethics professor for blowing the whistle on corporate collusion. He was the only one who ever told me, "You're not here to serve the system. You're here to question it." I walked out of MIT the next morning. I never mailed the letter to anyone. It just sat there, a reminder. A soft knock broke the quiet. I opened the door and found my mother standing there, wrapped in a beige trench coat, her hair pinned neatly, but her eyes swollen. She stepped inside, hesitant, as if unsure she belonged here. "I didn't want to call," she said. I needed to see you." I led her to the couch. She sat down slowly, hands trembling in her lap. For a while, we just sat. No words, no pretense. Then she whispered, "I saw the way they looked at you today, at the boardroom. I haven't seen your father so speechless since ever." I offered a small smile. "He'll recover. He always does." She looked at me, then really looked. "We were wrong, Alex. Your father. Daniel. Me. We thought you were running away, but you were running towards something we didn't have the eyes to see." I didn't respond. "I kept your letters," she said. "The ones you sent after training. The one from your first overseas assignment. I didn't show them to your father. I thought if I ignored them, it would all go away. The guilt." I stood and walked to the desk, picking up the envelope, handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "My MIT resignation letter," I said. "Never mailed. I left because I refused to work for people who erased the truth, and I knew if I stayed, I'd become just like them." She opened it, read the first few lines, then pressed it to her chest. "I'm proud of you," she said through tears. "Not for the medals or the rank, but for doing what none of us could." I sat down beside her. "I never needed to be the favorite," I said. "I just wanted to be seen." She nodded. "And now you are." Outside, the city glowed with a cold, distant light. But inside, for the first time in years, something warmer stirred. Because in the end, it wasn't victory I wanted. It was understanding. And I was finally starting to feel it. 6 months later, the Monroe estate felt strangely different. The air still carried the scent of polished wood and citrus oil, the marble floors still gleamed beneath designer rugs, but something had shifted. It wasn't the decor. It was the energy. It was the way people paused to listen when I spoke, instead of brushing past me like I didn't exist. I had been invited back for a small family dinner. No gala, no press, just us. My mother greeted me at the door with a genuine smile and a warm hug. No hesitation this time. She took my coat, told me I looked healthy and well-rested, even if it wasn't entirely true. Daniel was already in the living room, sitting by the fire, with a glass of wine and a tired look in his eyes that seemed older than it should have been. When he saw me, he stood and extended his hand, not out of obligation, but with sincerity. "Glad you came," he said. "We kept it small on purpose. No show." I nodded. Appreciated. We sat for a while catching up. His tone was softer than before, less sharp. He spoke about the company like someone who had finally started to see beyond the numbers. "We're rebuilding the Prometheus proposal from scratch," he said. "Tighter, cleaner, no shortcuts. I implemented that risk check protocol you mentioned." "It worked?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He smiled faintly. "Better than I expected. You've always been 2 steps ahead. I just never wanted to admit it." Dinner was served in the dining room, the same table that once felt like a silent battlefield. But tonight it was different. Laughter came easier. My father, still composed and stoic as ever, asked questions about my current projects, not to challenge, but to understand. I told him what I could. Nothing sensitive, of course, but enough to give him a glimpse into my world. And then I saw it. On the far wall above the credenza where family photos were displayed, there was a new frame, a photo of me in full uniform shaking hands with Secretary Rhodes at the Prometheus milestone briefing. The medal on my chest gleamed beneath the overhead light. My nameplate was visible, my title unmistakable. I froze for a moment. My father followed my gaze. "We hung it last month," he said quietly. "It belongs here. You belong here." My mother smiled gently. "We're proud of all our children now." Later that evening, I stepped out into the garden alone, the pool reflecting the stars like a quiet mirror. My mother followed, draping a jacket over my shoulders like she used to when I was a boy. "It's chilly, Alex," she said. "I'm okay," I replied. She paused, then said something I'll never forget. "I'm proud of you, not because you're Director Monroe, but because you're my son." I swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in my eyes. "I know, Mom. I know." And in that quiet moment, I realized something. The uniform might have changed the way they saw me, but it was never about the rank. It was about finally being seen. Some battles aren't won with noise. They're won with patience, principle, and the courage to stand alone until the truth is loud enough to speak for itself. This story isn't just about Alex. It's about the silent resilience so many carry, the men and women who walk away from comfort to build a life of principle. The sons who are mocked for not fitting into a mold, the daughters who are underestimated, the professionals whose true worth is invisible until the day it isn't. What makes this story powerful isn't the uniform or the rank, it's the integrity, the decision to stay the course even when no one's clapping, even when family misunderstands, even when the world assigns you a lesser title. Because sometimes dignity isn't loud, it's quiet. It shows up in the boardroom. It shows up in the email that says, "Thank you." It shows up in the framed photo that finally goes on the wall. If this story struck a chord with you, leave a 1 in the comments to let us know you're still walking your own path, even if it's been lonely, just like Alex did. And if you believe in stories that speak for the unheard, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded your truth is enough, even if it takes time for the world to catch up.